Welcome to the Voice of Family Business on Capitol Hill. It's great to have you with us. With each podcast from Family Enterprise USA, we bring you the latest news, expert opinions, and insights affecting the country's largest employer, the American family business. If you like the series, please remember to subscribe and sign up for alerts as future shows are posted. This podcast is sponsored by Innolex, global manufacturer of sustainable ingredients for the beauty and personal care industries. In this episode, the discussion is focused on the need for educating the next generation of family business leaders. Family Enterprise USA's Pat Soldano interviews Daniel Van Der Vliet, the John and Dyan Smith Executive Director, Family Business Initiative in the S.C. Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University. Now, let's listen in on where the state of education and family communication are today, and the role family business centers and universities play today among America's largest private employer, the family business.
Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Pat Soldano, President of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. If you don't know who we are, we advocate for multi-generational family businesses and their lifetime of savings and investment in their businesses around the country, from all industries, big and small. I'm delighted to be here today with my friend Daniel Van Der Vliet, one of the top educators on family business and the development of tomorrow's next generation of family business leaders. Dan is the John and Dyan Smith Executive Director of the Family Business in the S.C. Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. We have a lot to talk about when it comes to next generation of family business leaders, and Dan is right in the middle of that development. Dan, it's great having you here. Thank you so much for taking the time from your very busy schedule.
Thanks, Pat. It's good to see you as always.
So Dan, my first question is, I know you travel quite a bit, and recently you just came back from India, where you taught a class on family business to students there. If you were to compare the challenges of those family businesses, that next generation of leaders in India, with the students that you teach at Cornell, what are the differences? Or are the issues the same all around the world?
Yeah, India is a wonderful laboratory, if you will, for family business. The numbers of family business in India are pretty staggering. I've seen numbers higher than 90% are family owned, family controlled, or family influenced in India. But there are many similarities when it comes to family business in India as there are here. I think first, just working with family is always a challenge. The separating the emotional context from the business context is really the same no matter where you go throughout the world. Issues of transition and succession and how businesses determine who might take the business over and when are certainly always an issue there as well. I would say also just, the interest level of the next generation. I mean, this generation of family business leaders has access to things that, frankly, you and I, Pat, really didn't. I mean, it's a global world now. They can do business from a laptop. They can communicate with anyone, anywhere, at any time. So that poses both an opportunity, I think, as well as a challenge for any family business, as well as modernization. Folks want to work in relevant businesses and businesses that have a future to them. So I think that's the same here as it is in India. I would say some things that are very different in India. The family context is much different in India. Living together with family through adulthood by choice, not by need or necessity, is very common in India. Also, the fact, and if they're not living together, they're all living in very close proximity and working in close proximity. A few of the things that I saw in India, and this is, well known, is that, the status of women and their ability to enter into the business there's still a lot of room for growth in India. There's progress being made for sure. There's some amazing female entrepreneurs right now. But we are seeing some cases being fought right now of some pretty high profile companies like Moragrappa, where the female, although qualified, has been not given a seat on the board of a family business. And this is a very high profile case that's playing out right now. And I think there's just also a cultural difference in India that is a little bit different than here. First, the fact that family is so close-knit and that working in the family is often seen as a point of honor. And I see that with the students that I work with here at Cornell University as well. There's a little less of that sort of individualistic mindset that we have here, but it's growing. Again, I think what's happening is all of these cultures are beginning to mesh as people travel more and have access to more resources. So that can be both a positive as well as, sometimes a challenge for any family business. But it was fascinating to get over there finally to teach a very, impressive young group of both family business folks, but also people who are just generally interested in family business. And I hope that I'll be able to repeat that experience at some point again.
Well, I think that is very interesting. The fact that the family unit within the family business operates differently. They stay at home, they live at home much longer, as you indicated, as well as the status of women not only in the family unit, but also in the family business. So let's talk about that next generation. It seems that there's this issue of basic communication, as you touched on a little bit already, as a key factor for this next generation. As you mentioned, they can communicate all around the world now with this remote ability that we have. So the question of, will they step up in the business? Will they be the next generation of leaders? What kind of career choices do they have? And what are they going to do about those career choices? Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your experience working with the next gen and how are they dealing with assessing those next choices, assessing whether they're going to step up and be part of the business.
Yeah. In the class that I teach, both when I was in India, but also here at Cornell, I use a concept that I call big G, little g governance. Of course, governance is a system for making decisions and communication. And we think of board of directors and family council as, very formalized processes of governance. And those I would classify as sort of big G, little g to me is the ability of people to talk and communicate. And this is really where I think effective governance begins. And so for students that are in the class, I often ask them the question, have you ever talked with your mom or dad or whoever the senior leaders in the business are about what their plans are for the business, how they might see you being involved in those plans? Because often I'll have students, they'll say things like, oh yeah, my dad expects me to come back to the business. And I'll say, well, how do you know that? Well, he just does, It's like, well, have you asked him that? Have you actually had that conversation? And, I use a few examples here of one was a student, this was a number of years ago, had come to Cornell, and over Christmas break at one point, he went back home, only to discover that mom and dad were selling the business. And he said, well, what are you doing? Why are you selling the business? This was something that I was going to school to come home and hopefully take over one day. And the parents said, well, you went off to school. We thought you had your own plans. So that's why we sold the business. And so just the fact of those two parties not having the conversation around what each other's plans were led to the business leaving the family. And I think that's an important place for anyone to start who is considering whatever their role is in the business, whether they have active plans to return to it, whether they have no desire to return to it, or they're sort of just on the fence. And so little G conversations to me are having a cup of coffee, taking mom or dad or whoever, it might even be your siblings, and having some of those more casual conversations where maybe you can ask some of those questions that might be a little bit more challenging, but at least open the doors of communication. I use a trick with some of my students. I'll often say, use this class as an excuse to have those tough conversations. My professor wants me to ask you this, so I guess I have to. And sometimes that can open the door to some very honest and open communication.
Well, you've touched on this succession planning, right? And succession is always at the top of the list in terms of what families want to hear about from other families. How are they dealing with succession? So do you think that the families, not only in India, but here, are doing any better around succession planning? And why is this always continue to be a really important issue, but yet it seems like it's not done anywhere near as much as it should be done?
Yeah, I think succession planning is, I saw a survey once that it is the number one source of procrastination for every business owner, because I think on one hand, it deals with the owner at some level, maybe having to face up to their mortality, or at the very least, the fact that, at some point they have to leave this business that has become so much a part of them. On the other side, I think it also deals with choice. Is this something that we want to keep in the family? And if so, do we have qualified leadership? And sometimes, if there are numerous children involved, that can require some tough conversations as well. How do you pick one child over another for being the CEO or leader, or also, kind of making this distinction between ownership of the business, which can sometimes be an equity decision, meaning we want to split this equally amongst the children, versus management of the business, where sometimes shared leadership can work, but not always. So this is, I think, at the crux of family business, and the work that you and I do is helping families to have some of these conversations, to realize that it is always going to be there. It's a continual process. It's really not an endpoint of any sort, and it's going to continue to change. And by that I mean, again, with this next generation of business leaders, they have much different expectations of how they want to be actively engaged in the family business, and they might want a better lifestyle. They might want to work more remotely. They might want shared leadership, as I referenced earlier. And sometimes these fly in the face of maybe more traditional senior generation leadership. And so that can often kind of create some of these tensions that either owners just put off because they don't want to make the decision, or it's going to create some issues within the family once they just figure out how that's going to be. So this is where I think the big G governance comes in, where having either at the very least a board of advisors, or perhaps a more formal board of directors who can play a much more active role, or at least a non-biased role in being able to say, here's what we need as a leader of this business. And maybe one of the family members meets these criteria, but maybe not. Maybe it's time to think of non-family management, and the family just retains ownership of the enterprise moving forward.
Well, and to help them with this succession, as you and I have talked, there are courses in family business management, succession planning. Of course, there's family business centers that present a lot of workshop around these topics as well. So Cornell is one of the leading academic institutions with an initiative in family business studies. So talk to us a little bit about what is the state of university level programs for family business in the United States?
Sure. This has long been an area of fascination for me. And I compare it to entrepreneurship. Most every major university has a very active center of entrepreneurship. We all love entrepreneurship. It's sexy. Create the business, build the business, scale it, and sell it. Those are great stories for any university to be able to say they played a role in the creation of said business. I mean, think of Florida State University and Gatorade, and how that's become such a part of that university there. And by last count, there were well over 1,000 plus entrepreneurship centers at U.S. universities alone. By comparison, to my knowledge, there are probably about 50 what I would call active family business centers within the U.S. and trickling over into Canada as well. So for some reason, sustaining a business for generations maybe isn't as sexy as creating a business. So I think there's a few reasons this is true. First, for universities, very often it's the research part of it that drives the academic focus. The literature surrounding family business is growing, and it's growing significantly, but it does trail behind, say, entrepreneurship, which was in a very similar position probably in the 1980s, early 1990s, where it was trying to gain foothold within the academic setting. Second, related to that first point is the fact that research of family business can be very challenging. So these are privately held businesses, and as such, they can choose what they report or not. So a lot of the research around family business tended to be much more qualitative than quantitative. There's not access to huge data sets that might be generated by public entities. Finding folks who are actively engaged in this research can be a challenge. And then finally, family business is not a discipline. Family business is really what we would call an interest area, or maybe even a theme that cuts across a lot of disciplines. So if you are a faculty member at a university, you specialize in finance, accounting, marketing. There are some academics that specialize in family business, but they are fewer and much more far between. So I think that's something that's very important to kind of keep in mind, where there's not as much, I guess, faculty interest in family business because they are rewarded for publishing in top journals. And there are just many more journals that they can publish in if they are a finance faculty or an accounting faculty, or at least journals of relevance in some of those cases.
Well, so let's talk about the courses and the next gen that are taking these courses. Mm-hmm. You and I've talked about doing work around that and getting to understand what next gen wants out of these courses, as well as, what are they learning. But one of the challenges is just identifying next gen family business owners in the first place, right? Because mm-hmm. maybe they're in a family business class, but maybe they're in a finance or accounting class. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, how you've been able to do that, and how many of your, business classes do you think include family business owners and next gen, and how you've been able to figure that out?
Yeah. I mean, we've been very fortunate here at Cornell. The Smith Family Business Initiative was founded in 2014, a very generous gift from John and Dyan Smith. Because they saw that there was a lack of quality education at top universities. So we've been able to build a program using the resources that were provided by that gift. And what that's done is it's given us time to build and grow the program properly. And we have always taken very much a student focus. And by that, I mean, of those other 50 family business centers I referenced earlier, many of them do what we would call outreach. So they develop trusted networks of family business owners typically within their geographical region. And while I think these are incredibly important for most university centers, it sort of overlooks the fact that the core mission of any university is to educate its students and engage its alumni. So if you're not doing that, then you can sort of be easily sidelined in a university setting. So we've seen growth of the academic program here. We started with one course. We've seen that go from 12 students to up to 60 students this past semester. And that was capped out. Those students come from all over the world, truly. And we're very fortunate here at Cornell to have a very global population of students. They come from all manner of industry, all size of business. It's really fascinating to see that. We've added a second course, a follow-along course to that. That also had similar trajectory of growth. And now we even have an international trek where we take students abroad to learn about family business in a different cultural setting. So I think the lesson here is that the university has to be behind it and support it. Certainly having the financial resources to build it and grow it are necessary. And then also to have the expertise, have the faculty member and or the program directors that understand the need for this, that can create a home for these students to access once they are at the university. And what we found is that, this is now something that influences, if not determines, for certain students, where they go to school. And the fact that Cornell has this and several other of our peer schools do as well, this is something they're now looking for when they're making their decision, especially if family business is of importance to them.
Oh, we have found, as you know, through our Family Enterprise USA research, that many of these students or people that respond to our survey in particular tend to be second or third generation, and then, even some into the fourth generation. Are you finding that to be the case in these classes? And the second part of that question would be, how much do most of them know about their family business? If maybe they're not working in it, but maybe what's their knowledge level of the family business?
Yeah, so I actually survey at least the students in my class when they take it. And of those 60 or so students, I've actually seen over the last couple of years, the number of second generation students start to grow. So it used to be sort of that third and fourth generation of students. But now as the course has grown, we're I think getting more interest from students who are maybe a little bit earlier in the process. Our family owns a a dental practice, or our family owns a construction company. And I don't know what my role is going to be, but, I heard about this family business course, so I'm curious. I'd also attribute some of that maybe to a cultural context, meaning a lot of the family businesses in China, where we actually get a lot of our students from, are relatively younger. And so we're seeing that sort of next generation just beginning to emerge in China and also in some places in India. Now, I also get quite a few students from the ag school, from family farms, and we've had businesses in there that are 10th generation family farms, that date back to the 1800s. So, there might be an industry bias there as well, where at least in the U.S., a lot of our family farms do tend to be a little bit older and have been established for a much longer time, often third, fourth, fifth generation and beyond.
And do you see them knowledgeable about their family businesses, or most of them kind of in the dark?
I think they're knowledgeable. Again, if I use sort of a cultural context here, for a lot of our students that come from the US and North America, it's more of a curiosity factor, more of like, I don't know if I want to do this. I want to go work in the big city, or I want to go out and create my own thing. Versus, by comparison, students from, say, India or Latin America, where there's much more of an affinity towards their family business. And while they might not return immediately, they have very definite plans to make their way back at some point. And again, I think that relates to the family context in both Latin America and in India, as opposed to the family context here in the U.S. The U.S. is much more focused on entrepreneurship, much more focused on, the individual sort of being the maker of their own decisions versus a collective approach that we see in some of these other cultures. But what I do find in the course, as it relates to what do they know very little. And I think that's a good thing from the perspective of they're in the class and they're learning. So we take something as basic as the 3-circle model that we talk about a lot, and it's a starting point, for understanding the dynamic complexities of family business. Most students aren't familiar with that. And that helps them sort of locate themselves in that schematic. I'm part of the family. I've worked in the business, but I don't have any ownership. But this person over here has ownership, so there's a bit of a different relationship there. Or these people here work in the business, but they're not part of the family. So we use that as sort of a building block, and then we begin to talk about these other things that we've already discussed, like governance, like family systems, like leadership and succession. And what we do see is, students leave that class, as well as the follow-up class, which gets into a little bit more depth and detail, much more informed. And one of my favorite parts is when somebody comes in and says, I went home for Thanksgiving and I had this talk with my parents about the business, and I learned a lot. And this just happened actually 2 weeks ago when I was in India, that a student came in after the weekend and said they had that little G conversation. And I think that's why these family business classes are so important, because if you're in the family business, it's always there, but you might not actively be learning about family business. You might be learning about whatever the industry is, or, how to build a house or how to sell a car, whatever your family might be involved in. But until you sort of lift the hood, if you will, and understand it can get kind of messy under there. And until you know what all the moving parts are, you're not really doing yourself a service there.
I'm glad to hear that there are more courses being offered in family business and more schools understanding how important it is. Glad to hear you've had such great success at Cornell, increasing the number of students that are taking those courses. So maybe you could tell us, and you've talked about this a little bit already, but you could tell us the advantage of a student enrolling in Cornell Smith Family Business Institute courses.
Mm-hmm. So there's a few advantages. First, it's the fact that they are in there with their peers. Picture yourself as an MBA student at any school. It doesn't have to be Cornell, and you're in the midst of a strategy course, and the professor's up there giving you all this great insight on business strategy. But you want to raise your hand and say, that's all well and good, professor, but my dad would never go for that. So no student would probably raise their hand in the strategy course. But in this family business course, they can raise their hand. And then, 15 other heads in the class go, yeah, I totally get that. So I think first it's kind of creating that place where they feel like they are understood. They can ask these questions that have more to do with the family and less to do with perhaps the business context. And then some of those relationships, either with their peers or, very often, we'll bring in family business owners and leaders from the outside. And they get to hear from these business leaders and they realize, oh yeah, this is tough stuff. But this business survived for 3 or 4 generations. And here's some of the things they did very well. But even the businesses that we promote as business leaders, they will tell you it's tough. And they've gone through their own crises from time to time. But I think the advantage for the students is just that first exposure to their peers, understanding they're not alone, exposure to a wide range of expertise, whether it be on the ownership side or the consulting and advising side. And just knowing that, the university values and supports this. And I think that's long been a challenge for family business centers at universities, is that you and I have talked about this, Pat. It's sometimes like a game of whack-a-mole. As many of these centers get started up with very good intentions, the next week, many other ones get shut down. Some of that's due to funding. Some of that's due to the talent that, or lack of talent that might run these programs. Some of it's due to just a lack of academic interest in the subject. So again, we're very fortunate here at Cornell. Without that gift, I don't think this would have happened. So there is a financial component that makes some of this possible, but there's also an enduring support from the school that demonstrates that this is important. But again, I think being able to demonstrate the increased participation in classes and activities is a vital component of that. And if we weren't able to demonstrate that there is ever increasing interest in this area, it would make my job much more difficult.
Well, you're right about that. We work with, as you know, about 40 of those family business centers around the country, and we support them in any way we can, but we are typically their advocacy arm. But it is discouraging when the school president or dean of the business school doesn't really support the initiative. That's usually when it falls apart, right? So you really, really need the school and the leadership of the school to be committed, and it helps if they come from a family business background. So you're absolutely right about that. And talking about Family Enterprise USA and working with these centers, as you know, we recently completed our annual survey, which we're known for, and we had 571 respondents. We were incredibly pleased with that response rate in half the amount of time that we've had. And what we learned from our respondents is that taxes is their number one issue. Taxes, as well as, labor issues, finding labor, keeping labor, paying labor, and more so since the pandemic. But the income tax issue we find to be one of the top issues, because we've also learned that 80% of family businesses operate as a pass-through entity. So they're paying 37% in income tax as opposed to 21% that corporate America gets to pay. So with the research work that you're doing at Cornell and the Smith Family Business Institute initiative, what have you found around those lines of, tax policy, income tax policy that's been maybe a concern or an issue, if they've expressed it to you at all, from your family businesses?
Yeah, well, first I want to commend you, Pat, in the work that you've done with Family Enterprise USA. You have really grown that network, and you've given it a voice in Washington, D.C., especially with the recent formation of the Family Business Caucus, which I think is just remarkable. And through you, we're able to pass on a lot of that information and those resources to our constituents. We're not really a membership organization like some of the other family business centers. We're much more of a network organization in that regard. But I would say, to your point, the issue of taxes is always present because, this is a function of, business owners trying to control expenses, but also, know what's coming from year to year. If owners can know what's coming and they can plan for it, I think the amount is less significant. But if the tax law is changing from year to year, that creates uncertainty and it becomes much more harder to plan for. So, we remain very apolitical. It's our job really just to kind of build and grow that network and provide resources and or education where possible. So this is where, I would argue that, what you do with Family Enterprise USA is incredibly valued to me. And also, the way that we run our program here at Cornell. You've made yourself greatly available to all the other centers, both individually as well as collectively. So that's what I'm seeing. And, within our sort of smaller peer groups that we run here, I think they have more discussions around that. But quite honestly, I'm not privy to some of those conversations because those are confidential settings.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for your kind words. So my last question, and you already mentioned this, is really around how do you talk to legislators? How does family businesses get their stories out there? And you mentioned that we helped Congress form this Congressional Family Business Caucus. We're very excited about that. Our next caucus meeting that I hope you're going to be in the room is May 16th. And we are bringing those executive directors from some of the centers around the country to come and be in Washington, D.C. for the day and attend that caucus meeting, as well as do those Hill meetings. And you've done those, so you know how important they are. So my question would be, is there anything else that family business owners can do to get the message out to members of Congress in terms of what are their issues, what are their concerns, what are they stumbling through in trying to run their business every single day? Are there any other suggestions or avenues?
Yeah, I mean, first I would sort of compare the work that you've done with the caucuses at the congressional level to somewhat, the plight that we face here at the university, where family business doesn't fit in any one box. It cuts across a lot of areas. And most of the caucuses, from what I learned through that process, are much more aligned with industries, whether it's manufacturing or agriculture or you name it. But again, family business cuts across all of that. So the role of the caucus is really just to kind of raise the level of awareness and education as it pertains to some of this tax law and or policy that affects businesses across many industries. So it's really in some way almost kind of creating a quasi industry of just family business. And I think that's incredibly important because that's what we see here. We don't specialize in any sort of industry segment. We try to be inclusive when it comes to what family business is. So I think giving those family business owners a collective voice is incredibly important, to know that they have somebody that's sort of doing the research, being able to report out, and then, having that collective voice have some volume where it's needed. And I think that's why this partnership between Family Enterprise USA as well as many of these family business centers is incredibly important, because collectively those 50 centers, each have relationships with anywhere between 50 and 100 businesses. So, all of a sudden, we're starting to get into the thousands of family businesses that if we can kind of channel their voice in one direction, suddenly that has incredible impact. So I know that's the value that I see in our relationship with Family Enterprise USA. And that's the value that I sort of sell to our constituents when we talk about, hey, please do this survey. It's incredibly important. Please, attend Capitol Hill if you can, or just let us know what's on your mind, and then we can be your voice for you. So I think that's what you've done, and I'm very excited about the caucus, and I do plan to be there in May, and because this will be sort of the last year was getting it started, and now this year hopefully we'll see that in action, and hopefully that that conversation becomes a little bit more two-way, that it's not just us sort of talking to congressional leaders, but them saying, okay, this is great, here's what we're going to do, or here's the actions that we need to take.
Well, I appreciate that. And we really appreciate you coming to Washington, D.C. on May 16th for that caucus meeting. And I'm glad you mentioned the caucus is an educational caucus. You're absolutely right. It's not a policy caucus. Mm-hmm. It's meant to educate members of Congress, the media, voters, all of who really don't understand family businesses. And it's bipartisan. We're very, very pleased to have four co-chairs, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So we really appreciate your time. And this has been a real pleasure, Dan. With so much going on, I want to thank you for your time. This has been fascinating. I know our family business leaders have learned a lot about the next generation of family business leaders and how they will take charge with your help and Cornell's help with the Smith Family Business Initiative.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. As always, been a pleasure and look forward to seeing you in person real soon.
We hope you liked today's show, and we hope you subscribe to our podcast, where each episode discusses the critical issues affecting multi-generational family businesses around the country. You can find this podcast wherever you download your podcast. Until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this week's Family Enterprise USA podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Inolex. This is the only series devoted exclusively to the critical issues facing America's family businesses, the families that own them, and family offices. We hope you like this week's show. Please make sure to subscribe and tell others about our podcast. Your voice in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country can make a difference. We look forward to having you listen to us next time.